Loneliness doesn't announce itself loudly. For me, it arrived quietly, settling into the corners of my apartment after the end of a relationship I once believed would last. My name is Ethan, and by the time I turned 32, I had learned how easy it was to disappear in plain sight. Friends drifted, routines hardened, and the man I loved slowly became someone who spoke to me like a stranger. When it ended, there was no dramatic fight, just absence. And absence can be heavier than anger. Most evenings, I found excuses to stay out of my own home. Silence there felt judgmental, like it knew too much. That was how I ended up at the neighborhood swimming pool, an unremarkable place with chipped tiles, the smell of chlorine, and a comforting anonymity. At the pool, no one expected conversation. Everyone moved with purpose. You swam your laps, kept your head down, and left. It felt safe to be unseen that I started going 3 times a week. Same hour. Same lane. I liked the discipline of it, the predictable rhythm of breathing and movement. Underwater, thoughts dulled. Memories softened. For a while, loneliness couldn't follow me beneath the surface. That was where I first noticed Lucas, that he didn't stand out in any obvious way. He wasn't loud or imposing, didn't draw attention to himself. He simply existed with a calm presence that felt deliberate. Lucas usually arrived just after I did, stretching quietly at the edge of the pool before slipping into the water with practiced ease. We often shared adjacent lanes, separated by nothing more than a floating rope and an unspoken agreement to keep our distance. At first, our interaction was limited to small, polite gestures. A nod. A brief smile. Once, when I dropped my goggles, he picked them up and handed them to me without a word. His eyes lingered for half a second longer than necessary, not intrusive, just curious. I told myself I imagined it. Over time, I began to notice patterns. Lucas favored the early evening like I did. He swam with steady precision, never rushing, never lagging. When he rested, he leaned against the pool wall and stared at the ceiling, as if counting something only he could see. There was a stillness about him that felt earned, not accidental. I tried not to think about him outside the pool, but loneliness has a way of creating room for people in your mind. I wondered what his life looked like when he left. Whether he was happy. Whether he, too, came here to escape something he couldn't name. One evening, the pool was quieter than usual. A storm threatened outside, thunder murmuring in the distance. As I finished my last lap, Lucas surfaced beside me, both of us catching our breath at the shallow end. For the first time, the silence felt awkward instead of comfortable. Long day? He asked, his voice lower than I expected. I hesitated, surprised by how much that simple question unsettled me. Yeah, I said. Yours? He nodded. Most days are. It wasn't much, but it felt like a door cracking open. We didn't exchange stories or names then. We just stood there, water lapping against the tiles, listening to the hum of the lights above us. When he finally pushed off and returned to his lane, I felt an odd sense of loss, as if something unfinished had been left between us. That night, I replayed the moment more than I cared to admit. Not because of what was said, but because of how it felt. Being noticed. Being addressed directly. It reminded me of how starved I'd become for ordinary connection. The next time we crossed paths, Lucas smiled first. This time, it felt intentional. Ethan, I said. When he asked my name, Lucas, he replied, and the way he said it made it sound like an offering. As we parted that evening, walking toward opposite locker rooms, I felt lighter and more uneasy all at once. I had come to the pool to escape my loneliness, not complicate it. Yet something had shifted. I didn't know what role Lucas would play in my life, only that the quiet refuge I'd built for myself was no longer just mine, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure whether that frightened me, or gave me hope. After that evening, the pool no longer felt like a neutral place. It carried anticipation now, a quiet awareness that began the moment I stepped through the doors. I told myself nothing had changed, yet my body betrayed me. I arrived a little earlier, stretched a little longer, watched the entrance without meaning to. When Lucas appeared, the air around me seemed to settle, as if the space had been waiting for him too. Our conversations grew naturally, stitched together between laps and rest breaks. They were simple exchanges at first: workdays, favorite swimming times, harmless complaints about sore shoulders. Lucas spoke carefully, choosing words as if they mattered. I noticed he asked questions but rarely volunteered answers of his own. There was restraint in him, a practiced distance that made me curious without pushing me closer. For my part, I shared just enough to seem open without revealing the mess underneath. I told him I lived alone, that swimming helped me clear my head. I didn't mention how empty my evenings felt or how often I replayed old conversations in my mind. With Lucas, I wanted to be uncomplicated. One evening, we lingered longer than usual by the lockers, still damp, still barefoot, talking as the pool emptied around us. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling closing time. Neither of us moved right away. "You ever feel like this is the only quiet you get?" Lucas asked, gesturing vaguely toward the water. I nodded before thinking. "That's exactly why I come." He smiled at that, but it didn't reach his eyes. Something flickered there, recognition, maybe relief. It was the first time I sensed that his presence at the pool was not just habit, but necessity. Over the following weeks, our connection deepened in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. We didn't touch, didn't flirt openly. Yet there was intimacy in the way Lucas waited for me before starting his laps, or how he slowed his pace to match mine during cooldowns. We shared silences that felt intentional, not empty. I began to notice how easily my loneliness softened around him, how the sharp edges of it dulled simply because he was near. Then one evening, as rain streaked down the high windows, Lucas said something that shifted everything. "I should probably tell you something," he began, his gaze fixed on the rippling surface of the pool. "Before this feels like something it shouldn't." I didn't respond. I was afraid that if I spoke, I'd interrupt whatever truth he was gathering the courage to share. "I'm not free," he said finally. "I'm in a relationship." The words landed heavily, echoing inside me. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a warning I recognized too well. "Oh," I said, carefully. "Okay." He rushed to continue, as if silence might condemn him. "It's not what it used to be. We live together, but we barely talk. I don't come here to cheat. I come here to remember who I am." I believed him. That was the dangerous part. After that confession, something invisible but powerful bound us closer. We spoke less about the future and more about feelings, fatigue, distance, the quiet grief of being misunderstood. Lucas never spoke badly about his partner, which somehow made everything worse. There was no villain to justify the closeness growing between us. That I knew the signs. Lingering eye contact. Conversations that felt incomplete when interrupted. The way I replayed his words long after I left. This was how it started: the slow erosion of boundaries, the gentle rewriting of rules. I told myself nothing physical had happened, as if that absolved everything else. One night, after a particularly intense conversation about loneliness, Lucas looked at me and said, "I feel more like myself here than anywhere else." The honesty in his voice cut through me. I wanted to say something reassuring, something safe. Instead, I said nothing. My silence became permission. As I walked home later, the weight of realization settled in. I wasn't just a witness to someone else's unhappiness anymore. I was participating in it. Becoming part of the escape that once tempted me to. By the time I reached my door, I understood the truth I had been avoiding: feelings had crossed a line, even if bodies had not. And I knew that whatever came next would demand a choice, one that would cost someone their peace. That I didn't know yet who that someone would be. I stopped going to the pool for nearly 2 weeks. At first, I told myself it was because of work, because of fatigue, because life had simply gotten in the way. The truth was less convenient. Avoiding the pool was easier than confronting what Lucas had come to mean to me. Without the steady rhythm of laps to quiet my thoughts, loneliness returned in sharper form, now tangled with guilt. I recognized the pattern too well. This was how things unraveled, not with dramatic gestures, but with small decisions made in silence. At home, I replayed our conversations until they blurred together. I thought about how carefully Lucas chose his words, how his restraint masked a deep hunger to be understood. I wondered whether his partner noticed his absence on evenings when he came to swim, or if the distance between them had grown so wide that even disappearance went unnoticed. These thoughts unsettled me, not because they were unfair, but because they tempted me to justify staying. Eventually, I returned to the pool, knowing that postponing the moment would only give it more power. The air smelled the same, chlorine and damp concrete, but the familiarity no longer comforted me. As I stepped onto the deck, I saw Lucas at the far end, leaning against the wall, his shoulders tense. When our eyes met, relief and caution crossed his face at once that we didn't speak right away. We swam, slower than usual, each lap heavy with unspoken intention. When we finally stopped, resting at the shallow end, I realized there was nothing left to avoid. "I didn't know if you'd come back," Lucas said quietly. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. The honesty between us felt fragile, like glass held up to the light. Lucas took a breath, as if steadying himself. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what this is. About what it's becoming." I nodded. "So have I." He told me he had finally spoken to his partner, not in anger, but with exhaustion. Nothing was resolved yet, but pretending had become impossible. "I can't keep escaping here," he said. "It's not fair. Not to him. Not to you." Hearing my name in that sentence carried unexpected weight. It confirmed what I had tried to deny: I mattered in this equation. And that meant I was responsible too. "I don't want to be someone's refuge from a life they haven't faced," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I've been on the other side of that. I know how much it hurts." Lucas's expression softened, tinged with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," I replied. "And I meant it. But wanting isn't enough." We stood there in silence, water lapping gently against the tiles, the pool nearly empty. There was no dramatic goodbye, no promises whispered under fluorescent lights. Just an understanding settling into place, heavy but necessary. When we finally left the pool deck, we walked together part of the way before stopping at the entrance to the locker rooms. Lucas extended his hand, hesitated, then let it fall. We shared a small, rueful smile, one that carried gratitude as much as loss. "Take care of yourself, Ethan," he said. "You too, Lucas." Time passed. I returned to the pool on my own, reclaiming the space without the ache of expectation. It felt different now, not hollow, but honest. I still felt lonely at times, but it no longer defined me. I understood that loneliness wasn't something to escape by borrowing someone else's warmth. It was something to confront, to listen to learn from. Sometimes, as I swam, I thought of Lucas, not with longing, but with clarity. What we shared was real, even if it couldn't last. And in choosing to let it end, I had chosen something else too: integrity. That I went to the pool searching for relief from loneliness. I left with something quieter, sturdier, a sense of self I hadn't realized I'd lost. And though the water still closed around me the same way, I no longer felt like I was drowning, that I was finally moving forward. Months passed quietly, the way meaningful change often does. Life didn't transform overnight after my final conversation with Lucas, nor did my loneliness vanish as a reward for doing the right thing. Instead, something subtler took place. My days grew steadier. My thoughts, less crowded. The absence I once feared began to feel like space, room enough to breathe. That I kept swimming. The pool remained a constant, though my relationship with it had changed. I no longer arrived searching for relief from myself. I came because I wanted to move, to feel my body working in harmony with my mind. Some evenings were still heavy, but they no longer defined me. I had learned that solitude could be endured without being filled by the wrong person. That I never saw Lucas again. At first, I half expected him to appear one evening, slipping into the water like before, calm and familiar. When he didn't, I felt a brief sting of disappointment, followed by an unexpected sense of peace. Not every connection is meant to be revisited. Some exist only to teach us where our boundaries lie. Occasionally, I wondered how his life had unfolded. Whether he found the courage to confront what he had been running from. Whether honesty brought him clarity or loss. But I resisted the urge to romanticize our unfinished story. What we shared mattered precisely because it ended when it needed to. Outside the pool, I began rebuilding in small, deliberate ways. I reached out to friends I'd neglected. I allowed myself to be awkward in new spaces, to risk rejection without retreating into silence. I spoke more honestly, not just with others, but with myself. I stopped pretending that loneliness was something to be outrun. One evening, as I floated on my back, staring up at the ceiling lights shimmering through ripples, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. The fear had been replaced by discernment. I knew now that connection, when rushed or borrowed, could be as damaging as isolation. That I didn't regret going to the pool during that difficult season. It gave me stillness when I needed it most. But I understood now that escape had never been the solution. Awareness was. Choice was. As I gathered my things to leave that night, I caught my reflection in the locker room mirror. I looked the same, but I felt different, more grounded, less desperate for validation. I saw someone capable of waiting for the right kind of love, the kind that doesn't require secrecy or sacrifice of self. The story didn't end with romance. It ended with responsibility. And though that might sound less dramatic, it felt more powerful. That I stepped outside into the cool night air, the city humming softly around me. Loneliness still existed, but it no longer controlled the direction of my steps. I walked forward with intention, open to whatever came next, not because I needed someone to complete me, but because I had finally learned how to stand whole on my own. And if love found me again, I knew this time it would meet me where I truly was, no longer hiding, no longer escaping, but ready.